Hello, I'm Rev Michael Mugford, and I'm part of the ministry team at Cole Harbour Woodside United Church, along with the Reverend Krista Elizabeth Wynne, and I'm pleased to offer this reflection today. One of the email newsletters I subscribe to comes from Father Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation. I try to start my day each day by reading it and spending a few minutes reflecting on the essay that arrives in my inbox. One day this week, Father Rohr, along with thoughts from theologians Jackie Lewis and Brian McLaren, reflected on our biases as human beings. Now, it intrigued me because so many of us have spent so much time trying to identify our personal biases and spot systemic biases in our world. Father Rohr wrote, quote, "When I don't have intense and sustained personal contact with the other, my prejudices and false assumptions go unchallenged." He goes on to say, think of the child who is told by people he trusts that people of another race or religion, cultural, sexual orientation, or class are, say, dirty or dangerous. When we have people in our lives that come from all different backgrounds, all ways of thinking, belief structures, etc., when we expand our worldview, it helps us to realize that our perception of the world is not necessarily the norm, but rather is indeed our perception. I was fortunate growing up that I did have some exposure to a fairly multicultural group of people, but that didn't keep me from learning or holding on to some pretty terrible attitudes and worldviews. Thankfully, as I grew up, my world expanded, and I learned to grow beyond my own perceptions or prejudices. The experience that stands out for me the most was when I was in my early 30s, and I was schooled on how damaging and hurtful my faith-based bias was by a classmate. It caused me to have to rethink my understanding of love, of God, of Scripture, and of my own attitudes, especially because I was going into ministry. Richard Rohr writes the words that describe my learning moment. He writes, "If we are willing to listen to the other and learn from them, we can break out of our contact bias, which opens us up to seeing in a new way." Often, Jesus or faith in Jesus is used to try to reinforce our created or inherited prejudices and contact biases. And yet, when we truly read the Gospels, we find that Jesus, time and time again, works to break down the barriers that have separated so-called sinners from the righteous. And he does this throughout his ministry. But one of my favorite stories in the Gospel is one in which, my interpretation anyway, is where Jesus shows his own bias and learns to expand even his view of the realm of God. It's the encounter with the Syrophoenician woman who comes to Jesus and begs her to heal her child, but Jesus rebuffs her because she's not Jewish. "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs," Jesus says. But she answers him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Every time I read that, I go back to my own experience of learning my own bias, and I can really identify with this story of Jesus. Jackie Lewis is quoted in Richard Rohr's essay and says this, quote, "The more we bump into the folks who are so-called other, the more we are stretched, the more we are pulled out of that bias and have new truths because we have tangible evidence of the beautiful, powerful creativity of God, who has made all of this diversity for us to enjoy." So true and so wise. Just some thoughts for today. Peace.